Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited that you're all here. My name is Brooke McDonough. I am VWL's Development and Communications Assistant, and I'm just going to help moderate some of the tech in the background. Um, and I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, you should have gotten a notification, but this is being recorded, so just keep that in mind. And this recording will be available um, after this event, probably tomorrow on our website, and we'll send it out in our newsletter. So you'll have access to rewatch everything or see it if you have to miss anything. And then Bernadette's going to present, and then we will have a Q&A, and you should be able to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. So feel free to use either. I will keep an eye on both, and we'll get through as many questions as we can. And with that, I'll kick it over to Amy to get started.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you everyone for joining us. I love seeing all the familiar names pop up. So excited to have you all here. Thank you so much. I just wanted to give a quick intro to this emerging webinar series that we're hosting. So I just want to double check with Brooke that you can see my slide. Okay, great. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy Johnson, and I am the Program Director of Virginia Working Landscapes. And Virginia Working Landscapes, or VWL, is a research program based out of the National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. And we bring together scientists, landowners, community scientists, and regional partners to promote the conservation of native biodiversity and sustainable land management through scientific research, which you'll hear a lot about today, through education, and also through community engagement. And so while we're part of, this global research institution that's the Smithsonian, Virginia Working Landscapes really gives us a platform to bridge the extensive network of science with all of our partners, with the expertise that our community holds, and also with on-the-ground conservation implementation right here in our local community. And so you see our mission here on the screen, and we work towards this mission every day through several goals. And I'm not going to go through all of the goals, but I think one of the most rewarding goals that we're working towards every day is cultivating the next generation of conservationists. So in doing so, we continue to see and just appreciate so much the incredible impact that our early career scientists have on advancing knowledge and advancing conservation in the region. So to support these emerging leaders, we launched the Emerging Scientists Lecture Series several years ago, just to provide a platform for early career scientists to share their research with our community. And then also for our community to be able to interact directly with them and provide feedback and ask questions. So this is our second Emerging Scientist webinar that we've had this year. Our first session we held in the spring, and we featured our PhD research fellow, Jordan Kosha. And they just gave a really insightful presentation on their research on grassland restoration with Virginia Tech and the Clifton Institute. So that webinar recording is available on our website for those that missed it, and as will this one later this week. But today, I'm so thrilled to introduce Bernadette Rigley. So Bernadette joined our team in 2020, that year when we felt like the world stopped. But Bernadette was able to join our team as a field technician to support a new project that was focusing on nesting grassland birds in agricultural landscapes. And from the very start, it was very clear that Bernadette had a unique passion for research and for conservation. She very quickly distinguished herself by asking just such thoughtful questions. She was formulating her own research hypotheses. She was contributing to our protocol development and actually the execution of it in the field. And then what really truly set, I think, Bernadette apart was her dedication to just building meaningful and genuine relationships with our landowner and producer partners. And since so much of our research takes place on private lands, her ability to just connect and listen to their perspectives and then incorporate their feedback into our research design has really just been really powerful. And just Bernadette's collaborative spirit, for those who know her, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I feel like it's really enriched our work and our team so much and really strengthened ties within our community. And so, thanks to the generous support of several local foundations and individuals, we were able to secure enough funding to create a graduate research fellowship for Bernadette to really take the lead on our grassland bird research and build a whole PhD dissertation around it. And so she's been pursuing her degree at George Mason University ever since, under the guidance of myself, as well as Dr. David Luther at George Mason. And we are just so proud of her journey, and you'll see why when you see her presentation today. And then, you know, just everything that she continues to accomplish, both personally and professionally. So I'd like to just pass it on to Bernadette to start the webinar.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that introduction, Amy. And let me get my slides up. All right, Brooke, can you see my slides here?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Well, again, Amy, thanks for that introduction, and thank you all for joining today. I'm really excited to be sharing some of my preliminary data from research that forms the basis of my dissertation for my PhD at George Mason University. And as Amy mentioned, I began with VWL in 2020, first as a technician, and now working as a research fellow and PhD candidate. So I'm just really looking forward to sharing some of these research developments. And I want to start by sharing this map of grassland types in North America. When we're discussing our grasslands in the US, many people tend to focus on areas west of the Mississippi, like our Great Plains region. And this map provides a really detailed look of some of those Western grasslands. However, we'll notice one thing immediately, or I hope some of you do, is that the Eastern United States is completely missing from this representation. And that's because there's still this really pervasive belief that the Eastern United States was completely forested. That was until European colonizers began to log forests. However, today we have mounting evidence from early historical records, from pollen analysis, as well as remnant prairies, all indicating that both pine and oak savannas, along with grasslands, were prevalent in regions that stretched from present-day Pennsylvania down to Florida and west into Texas. Unfortunately, less than 1% of these native grasslands and savannas remain intact. And this decline is primarily due to the loss of disturbance regimes. So that includes things like both natural and anthropogenic fire, as well as the disappearance of native grazers, so our bison. Additionally, a significant portion of our native grasslands in the Southeast have been converted to other land uses, primarily as agriculture. So it comes as no surprise then that our grassland birds, or those that depend on these open landscapes, are declining precipitously. They're declining more rapidly than any other ecological guild of bird, with a population loss of over 50%, and this is just in the last 50 years. So the loss of native habitat, again, changes in land use and intensified agricultural practices are cited as the primary causes of these precipitous declines. And what remains as available grassland bird habitat in the current landscape throughout the southeastern United States is primarily surrogate grasslands that are managed for cattle and hay production. Today, these pasture lands and hay fields throughout the Southeast cover some 65 million hectares, and they're really crucial for supporting our bird populations. However, intensified agricultural practices, such as overgrazing and early and frequent hay cropping, these can create ecological traps for our grassland birds, meaning habitats appear suitable, but they can actually be detrimental to their survival. So just to give you an illustration of this, hay cutting can result in 100% mortality of active nests. And it is often done earlier and more frequently today. So we see birds often trying to nest in fields under these intensive haying regimes, often waste their entire reproductive effort. In addition, nearly all of the grasslands in the Southeast are held under private ownership, which presents both some unique challenges as well as opportunities for conservation. It was the 2013 State of the Birds report that estimated that 97% of the entire population of eastern meadowlarks resides on private lands. And I think that metric just really demonstrates how grassland bird conservation in the Southeast is deeply intertwined with the livelihoods of producers and private landowners. So my research aims to address a couple of different knowledge gaps. First, we have a geographic gap. Much of our existing information comes from the Great Plains region, while the grasslands in the Southeast have been largely overlooked. And second, we need to still identify and understand factors that are affecting population growth or decline, especially in our southeastern grassland populations. And since these birds primarily inhabit private working lands, there's this really pressing need for research to inform management solutions that can facilitate their population recovery. So with all of this, I hope to identify management practices through this research that can both support bird populations while balancing the needs of cattle producers and private landowners. And we're accomplishing this by studying birds throughout their annual cycle. Now, the annual cycle describes a bird's ecology across the entire year. And for a migratory bird, it looks something like this. And for conservation to be effective, it's important to consider habitat needs and threats that birds may face at different times of the year. Now, as I mentioned, all of my research is being carried out in collaboration with Virginia Working Landscapes, and I've been collaborating closely with landowners and cattle producers in Warren, Fauquier, and Rappahannock counties to conduct my research on hayfields and pasture lands that are primarily composed of cool season non-native grasses and forbs like fescue. And I want to begin with our meadowlark migration study, where we are describing the movements and habitat use of eastern meadowlarks across the entire annual cycle. And this research is in collaboration with the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, the Migratory Connectivity Project, and the Smithsonian's Movement of Life initiative. Now, many of you are probably familiar with the eastern meadowlark. They're one of the first birds to start singing their song in early spring on our farms here in Virginia, and they have this striking yellow chest, and they're just a really beautiful bird to watch. And our eastern meadowlarks are what we call an iconic indicator species. So that means their presence or their absence alone can tell us a little bit about the health of a grassland. And just over the past 50 years, their populations have dwindled by a staggering 73%. So for every 4 meadowlarks that we had in 1970, today we have just 1. And we know that they're facing a multitude of natural and human-induced pressures, but as a migratory species, it can be difficult to determine at what life stage the decline is being driven. So in order to pinpoint where that bottleneck occurs in the annual cycle, we first need to understand their movement patterns and the types of habitat they utilize throughout the year. So we've been tracking their movements for birds that breed here in Virginia, and we've been doing this by capturing meadowlarks opportunistically on private lands during the spring season and outfitting them with a GPS device. And that's pictured here on the right. And the birds wear these like little backpacks. It's pretty cute, actually. And the tags are then pre-programmed to take a point weekly for 1 full year. So we're able to follow birds from July through to the following June. Locations are then relayed to a satellite network where we can then download and interact with the data remotely. So from our preliminary data, we're finding that our meadowlarks here in Virginia have a mixed migratory strategy, meaning that we see both short distance migrants and year-round residents within the population. So on the map, we have our migratory tracks here, where each color represents a different individual. And many of these birds are heading to Southern Virginia and North Carolina. And we see that birds breeding in Fauquier County over here, they tend to be favoring coastal areas during the winter. And birds breeding in Warren County tend to stay a little bit more inland. For those that do migrate, these distances range from 20 to 460 kilometers from their breeding grounds. And we also see that many of these birds are returning to the farms where we initially captured them that following spring. So often they're returning to the same exact field that they used previously. So we're also seeing really high site fidelity on their breeding grounds. On the other hand, we have individuals again that have stayed resident year round. So this bird, for example, remained in the same area where it raised its young and utilized less than 6 square kilometers of habitat throughout the entire year. And then in 2022, our Virginia-based research blossomed into a collaborative effort led by the Migratory Connectivity Project to track meadowlarks across their entire range. And this effort is being led by my colleague, Amy Scarpinetto, at the Smithsonian's Migratory Bird Center, where she has brought together 20 partners across the US and Canada to track our 3 native meadowlark species. So that's our eastern meadowlark, and with its geographic range, it's represented in yellow on the map. And then we have our western meadowlark represented in pink. And in the central region of the US where these 2 species overlap, that overlap range is shaded orange. We also have the Chihuahuan meadowlark, which is represented as the striped orange pattern extending from the southwest into Mexico. And I first want to highlight the migratory tracks represented as gray lines for our eastern meadowlarks and black lines for our western meadowlarks. And across both ranges, we see that our northern populations, so birds that are residing in Vermont, New York, Montana, and British Columbia, Canada, they are completely migratory. Across mid-latitude populations, so that's including Virginia as well as Pennsylvania and Colorado, these populations are partially migratory. Again, that means we see both short distance migrants as well as residents in the population. And the southern population, so Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, these birds are resident. Those are represented as gray points on the map for our eastern meadowlarks and black for our western meadowlarks. Some other things to note, we see a migratory divide among the continental divide. So birds are not crossing the Rocky Mountains. And areas like Sacramento Valley, California, are really important for overwintering birds. The Central Great Plains region also appears to be a really vital area for meadowlarks during all stages of the annual cycle. So it's supporting both our breeding birds, our migrating birds, as well as our overwintering birds. And then even right here in Virginia, this area is supporting birds year round. In fact, we had a bird that was tagged in Vermont that actually overwintered on a farm within the VWL network in 2023. This summer, my colleague Amy Scarpinetto and collaborators will be deploying GPS tags on Chihuahuan meadowlarks in Arizona. So we're excited to share more updates as we receive data over the coming year. And we still have a lot of data analysis ahead of us here. One of our major goals is not only to describe where meadowlarks go, but what types of habitat they utilize throughout the year. Our collaborators at Migratory Bird Center are also conducting a diet analysis using the fecal samples we collected, which will allow us to determine exactly what they're eating. And this data will complement the feather and blood samples that we gathered to test for the presence of neonics, which is a commonly used insecticide throughout the US. So this research is particularly interesting given the growing concern about the impact of neonics on non-target species, especially those living in agricultural environments. So lots more to come from this research. And then we're also exploring grassland bird ecology during the breeding season through our bird-friendly beef research. And our goal here is to explore how regenerative grazing and haying regimes influence the reproductive success of grassland bird communities. And before I move on, I want to define regenerative agriculture. It's a term that's gained a lot of popularity and traction in recent years, but it's presented as this novel, management approach, but its principles are deeply rooted in indigenous knowledge systems. Regenerative agriculture adopts a land sharing approach, aiming to create beneficial outcomes for both people as well as birds and other natural resources. And in graze systems, it's typically characterized by a reduced reliance on hay harvesting and a greater emphasis that's placed on rotational grazing, using techniques that mirror the behavior of traditional bison herds. Now, our grassland birds nest directly on the ground, making them particularly vulnerable to practices like haying. So it's really clear that the successful breeding of our grassland birds on working lands then really depends on the timing and approach of management activities. And for conservation to be effective on working lands, it's really essential to identify opportunities where agriculture and conservation can work hand in hand. Now, there's growing evidence that regenerative and rotational grazing systems can benefit livestock production as well as grassland birds, but there's still a significant gap in our understanding of how these practices directly impact habitat quality for grassland birds. So we worked with several local cattle producers as well as our partners from the American Farmland Trust to both co-develop and establish experimental treatments on Virginia farms. And this included 2 grazing treatments represented on the left of the figure. So our summer stockpiling treatment, here we had cattle grazing early before May 15th. Those cattle were then rotated off those fields, and those fields were left to rest and recover until about July 15th. That allowed for all of that grass and to grow over the season, and cattle producers then had standing forage that they could then graze in late summer or even early fall. Now, our graze treatment, here we had cattle just actively grazing during peak breeding season, so between May 15th and July 15th. And then we had 2 haying treatments. So an early hay, which was cut before June 1st, and then it was rested until July 15th. And the idea here was to allow for a really high quality hay harvest early in the season with a rest period of at least 45 days to give more time for birds to attempt to nest in those fields before they were then cut again. And we also had a delayed hay cutting. So in this treatment, those fields were cut anytime after June 15th. And then we collected breeding data from the entire community of birds that nest in our hayfields and pastures here in Virginia. So that includes our obligate ground nesting species. Again, these species are highly dependent on grasslands for nesting. So that is our eastern meadowlark, bobolink, grasshopper sparrow, and savanna sparrow. And then we also have a facultative grassland species, the red-winged blackbird. Many of you have probably seen red-winged blackbirds nesting along pond edges, but they will also utilize pastures and hayfields with tall vegetation for nesting. My team and I then spent countless mornings watching bird behavior and searching for nests so we could quantify reproductive success in our treatments. And once nests were located, we monitored them every 4 to 5 days until they either failed or fledged. We characterized vegetation within all of our fields by measuring the height and density. And since the initiation of this project in 2020, we have monitored over 700 grassland bird nests. It's really been a remarkable effort that's been made possible by my incredible team of summer interns. They're amazing, and the many landowners and managers who have participated in this research. Okay, and I just want to give you all a bird's eye view of what some of these nests look like. So this is an eastern meadowlark nest, which is this dome-like structure, has a roof that's made from grasses and other plant material. And the female construct these nests entirely on their own. She'll incubate the eggs for about 12 days. And once those eggs hatch, the nestlings remain in the nest for just 12 days before they fledge. So here we can see the female bringing food to her young, something large and scrumptious. But it gives you an idea of just how well camouflaged these nests are. Now, for the nests that failed, we made every effort to identify the cause of failure. So this figure shows the proportion of failure types for each treatment. And I'd like to highlight a few key points here. So first, predation, which is represented in this light green color, it accounts for nearly 75% of failures across all of our treatments, except that early hay treatment. So in the early hay treatment, most of those nests fail due to direct impacts from haying equipment or from predators immediately following haying. So if you've ever watched a field being actively hayed, you might have noticed crows or even ravens taking advantage of the situation and picking off eggs or nestlings that are exposed from haying. Now, nests also fail due to trampling by livestock, which accounts for about 20% of failures in our graze treatment. And again, this is where we had cattle actively grazing during peak breeding season. And of course, the risk of trampling is correlated with stocking density. So how many cows that you have out in your field. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But then I also want to address the unknowns, which are represented in this dark green color. In this situation, this is where we found nestlings that were dead in the nest with no clear cause. And in some of these cases, we actually ended up sending carcasses to our pathology lab, which indicated that heat-related issues were the probable cause of death. And I want to share this photo with you all. I know it's a bit morbid, but it's a striking photo that was taken by Brooke, and it shows a dead meadowlark nestling just outside of its nest. This was actually discovered this year during a time of drought and extreme heat. And this was one situation where pathology confirmed this mortality was heat related. So it just really underscores the importance of considering how drought and heat may be impacting our grassland birds. Okay, now the proportion of nests that successfully fledged varied across all of our treatments. And this plot here shows the proportion of successful nests, which are highlighted in dark green. And what we see is our late hay treatment and our stockpiling treatment produce the highest proportion of fledged nests. And this was expected, given that these treatments experience minimal human and livestock disturbance during those critical breeding windows. However, we wanted to identify exactly what factors are influencing nest survival. So we utilized a logistic exposure model to model daily survival rates as a function of different explanatory variables. And what we found is that vegetation height is a very strong predictor of nest survival. So here we have daily survival rate on the y-axis. And keep in mind that this metric refers to the probability that a nest will survive from one day to the next, and it's not overall survival. And then we have vegetation height on the x-axis. And here we see, right, that daily survival rates increase as vegetation height increases. And this aligns with what we expected, right? That taller vegetation offers greater concealment from predators, and in return, you have a higher chance of survival. But we know that management directly influences vegetation. So we also wanted to take a closer look at how management influences survival. So here we have two plots. And again, we have daily survival rates on the y-axis. And on the left plot, we have stocking rate, which is the number of cows per acre on the x-axis. What we see is as stocking rates increase, nest survival decreases. And again, this aligns with what we were expecting, right? Grazing cattle can impact vegetation around a nest, potentially exposing them to predators. And there's also that risk of direct mortality from trampling, which we documented several cases of. And on the right, we have date of harvest as an ordinal date on the x-axis. And what we see here is that daily survival rates increase as hay harvest is delayed later in the season. So survival is much higher when hay harvesting is delayed until late June and early July. Now we can also look at nesting phenology or the timing of nesting to gauge how shifting hay dates might impact survival. So here we have the cumulative proportion of nests fledged on the y-axis, and we have date on the x-axis. And the first thing I want to point out is just different nesting phenologies. So we notice that the bobolink, which is that dark green line, notice how steep that line is. They have just this really, really explosive nesting phenology. And it makes sense given that they're such a long distance migrant. They travel some 7,500 miles round trip every year from their breeding grounds in Virginia all the way down to Argentina and Bolivia, where they overwinter. And because of this, they have a shorter window for breeding before they have to fatten up for that really, really long fall migration. Whereas our meadowlarks, they're arriving to their breeding grounds earlier than our bobolinks. They're also nesting a little bit later in the season. So these females typically have an opportunity to have multiple broods of young, whereas our bobolink just have one. But around July 1st, we note that 80% of successful nests fledge by that date for about all of our obligate grassland birds. So typically hay cutting in Virginia takes place around Memorial Day weekend or June 1st. And most birds, other than a few of our meadowlarks, they're just not able to fledge young by then. And in fact, they're still in the middle of their nesting cycle. So by delaying your hay cutting by a month to that July 1st date, that can mean really huge wins for our grassland birds. So from all of this preliminary data, we have identified two best management practices to support our nesting grassland birds, right? The first is that summer stockpiling, and this is a win-win for both birds and cattle producers. It allows cattle to graze those fields early. They're creating this heterogeneous structure that can provide habitat for a variety of different species. Those fields are then left undisturbed during peak breeding season, allowing birds to flourish and raise their young. And because producers can then graze those fields in late summer or fall, it also reduces their dependence on having to make hay. And the second is that delayed hay cutting. So it's obvious, right? If we can avoid hay harvesting during critical breeding windows, it's going to be a huge win for our grassland birds. But we're also interested in how this can impact cattle producers because typically there is a loss of protein and nutrient quality as hay is harvested later in the season. So we've also been collecting some data on hay and nutrient quality in collaboration with our partners at the American Farmland Trust, so we can better understand the trade-offs that producers might face when they delay their hay harvest. So this is very preliminary data, but what this graph shows is that crude protein levels on the y-axis, that's expected to decline as hay harvest is delayed. So this coming season, we're aiming to collect a lot more data, so stay tuned for updates. And I'm also currently focused on finalizing the analysis for this research project. So I'll be sharing a lot more, more finalized results with you all soon. Now, our bird-friendly beef project also inspired the next research project I'm going to talk about. And this photo was actually taken by Dr. Amy Johnson, and we see a recently fledged red-winged blackbird that managed to leave its nest just in time to evade the tractor and hay harvest. And it's pretty clear to see, just how vulnerable young birds may be without sufficient cover from predators. So we really wanted to know more about what happens to these birds after they fledge their nest, which is a period referred to as the post-fledging period. So in 2022, we began collaborating with the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, the Smithsonian Mason School of Conservation, and the Smithsonian's Movement of Life Initiative to examine the survival, movements, and habitat use of juvenile grassland birds. So again, we know our grassland birds are declining, but to understand what factors are driving that population decline, we need to assess habitat quality at all life stages. Now, we've been collecting really valuable data on reproductive output and nest survival through our bird-friendly beef research. There's also nationwide efforts to understand adult survival, but this juvenile survival component, we know very little about. It's a really critical period where young birds are gaining independence from their parents, they're learning to fly, they're developing foraging skills, avoiding predators, right? Navigating their new surroundings. There's a lot going on, and it's a really challenging period for a young bird. And it has significant implications on population dynamics, but yet we still understand very little about it. So to address this, we have been tracking grassland birds during that post-fledging period. And we've been harnessing the power of the MODIS Wildlife Tracking System, or MODIS, to do so. And I just want to pause here and chat a little bit about MODIS because it is such a cool collaborative effort. MODIS utilizes a network of towers that are strategically placed across the country and around the world. And these towers are equipped with antennas that can detect signals emitted by radio transmitters that are then attached to an animal. So when an animal with a transmitter passes within range of one of these towers, the tower picks up the signal and records the animal's presence. And by having multiple towers in different locations, researchers can track the movements of animals over vast distances and across various habitats. So scientists are using MODIS to track the migration patterns and behaviors of birds, bats, and even invertebrates like the monarch butterfly. Now, in 2022, we set up our own MODIS tower on a farm in Warren County. And in addition to the MODIS tower, we also set up an array of automated receiving nodes across the 2-kilometer area on the farm. These automated receiving nodes act like little mini MODIS towers by picking up the signals of a radio transmitter that's attached to our bird. So when a bird with a tracking device flies within range of one of these nodes, it sends a signal to our main tower. And by analyzing the signals from at least 3 or more nodes, we can use what's called trilateration methods to estimate a bird's location and track their movement across the farm in pretty fine detail. So what's cool about this technology is that we can monitor birds both locally on the farm and potentially detect large-scale movements by tapping into that global network of towers. So we captured birds just before they were about to leave their nest and equipped them with small tracking devices. And again, these devices are worn like miniature backpacks with the transmitter sitting on the bird's back. Using our MODIS tower and our our network of nodes, we were able to follow their movements across the farm. Naturally, some birds survived while others didn't. And this is where my team and I would use a handheld Yagi antenna to track down those birds and assess the cause of their mortality. And then we've been tracking 3 species that represent the bird community found on working lands. So we have our 2 obligate grassland species. That's again our eastern meadowlark, as well as our bobolink. And then we also included the American kestrel, which is another species in steep decline They are a cavity nesting species, as well as our smallest falcon in North America, and they utilize grassland habitats to hunt. And the farm where we are conducting this research also has a mosaic of habitat types. So they have restored native meadows, forests, different types of hay, crops, as well as both cattle and horse pastures. So it makes for a really suitable study area for exploring how juvenile grassland birds utilize and interact with working lands. And I just want to give you a glimpse of what some of this data looks like. This is an animation that illustrates the movement of a juvenile meadowlark as it moves about some of the fields on this farm. And what's super exciting is that we're gathering really high detailed data from these birds, allowing us to actually see what types of habitat they're using. Notably, this bird is using two fields that have really dense vegetation cover. It's spending most of its time in those fields. And, we hypothesize here that that dense vegetation may aid in survival by providing cover and protection from predators. And then here's another glimpse at how juvenile birds are utilizing the habitats across the farm. So these plots here depict habitat utilization for a juvenile American kestrel on the left and a fledgling bobolink on the right. And these maps just represent a 24-hour period for these birds. So the orange represents habitat utilization during the day, and the blue is where they are roosting at night. And the main takeaway here is that, they're using a variety of different habitat types. We see that juvenile kestrels spend a lot of time learning to hunt along tree and fence lines that are adjacent to hayfields with relatively short grass. And then bobolink are utilizing a lot of uncut hayfields with really tall, dense vegetation. And we've even documented them roosting at night in a restored native warm season meadow. Now, besides monitoring our birds locally, we've also been able to detect long distance movements, again, by tapping into that global MODIS network. So the map here illustrates the estimated movements of 3 juvenile kestrels that were tagged in Virginia. Two of them made their way down to Florida, while another one headed to South Carolina, which is pretty cool to capture. So by utilizing, again, this technology, we hope to capture more of these large scale movements. Additionally, our tower on the farm in Virginia is detecting birds involved in other projects. So this allows us to also contribute to the broader data collection efforts of MODIS. And then we found that survival during a 40-day period after fledging the nest for 3 species ranged from 37% for bobolink and 95% for kestrels. So looking at the graph here, we have survival probability on the y-axis and the number of days out of the nest on the x-axis. And we see that survival, again, is pretty different among our species. Throughout the entire study, we only had 1 kestrel that died. On the other hand, our meadowlarks and bobolinks had relatively similar survival after fledging with really high mortality immediately after leaving the nest. And then we see rates of mortality decreasing with age. They seem to be most vulnerable within the first 15 days out of the nest. And again, that risk of mortality tapers off a bit. And these findings align with what we know about our species and our system. Because of the degree of parental care, the length of time in the nest, and the fact that kestrel can take sustained flight immediately after fledging, we expected them to have high survival during this post-fledging period. On the other hand, meadowlarks and bobolinks, they fledge the nest at around 11 to 12 days old, and they're basically just stumbling around the ground. They're not able to take sustained flight till about another 7 days out of the nest. And during this early post-fledging period, they spend nearly all of their time on the ground. So we expected to see high mortality as they are, really susceptible to environmental conditions and land management activities. So once more, I want to just share a bird's eye perspective. This is the same meadowlark nest, but here we have a young eastern meadowlark fledging. And you can see that rather than flying, the bird is just walking away from the nest and it begins to explore its surroundings. So the bird will spend, again, most of their time on the ground, especially for those first couple weeks as they learn to become independent from their parents. And off he goes. So common causes of mortality for these juvenile birds were predation, exposure to environmental conditions like heat, but we also documented a few meadowlark and bobolink mortalities from direct impact with farm machinery. So it was a bit unexpected about this finding is that in all cases, these birds were older and flight capable birds. So despite being able to fly and move out of the way from an oncoming tractor, they seem to just sort of stay put and often wait last minute to take flight. So it just leaves some, insufficient time to actually avoid these tractors. So one simple practice that might help mitigate this is a flushing bar, which is attached to the tractor. And it's designed to create disturbance ahead of or next to the tractor and provide additional time for birds to move out of the way and avoid potential injury or mortality. So again, a lot more to come from this research. We have a ton of data to analyze. But our main goal here is to identify factors that are actually driving survival during this post-fledgling period. And from that, we can develop management practices to protect them during this vulnerable stage. So all of this research, again, is helping us to gain a better understanding of grassland bird ecology throughout this annual cycle. And by doing so, we can more effectively inform conservation efforts, ensuring that strategies are tailored to the specific needs and challenges faced by these birds at different times of the year. In addition to our research, we're also aiming to collaborate with regional partners to translate our findings into actionable conservation efforts. So I just want to take a moment to highlight how we are already using preliminary data to promote positive change in our region through the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative, or VGBI. VGBI was created in 2021 in collaboration with the Piedmont Environmental Council, the American Farmland Trust, and Quail Forever. And it's coordinated by my colleague, Justin Proctor, and October Greenfield at the Piedmont Environmental Council. And this initiative is actively addressing the decline of grassland birds. They're hosting workshops, creating resources on best management practices, fostering open discussions among practitioners, landowners, and scientists. They're doing excellent work, and I highly recommend that you check them out if they're not on your radar already. And one of VGBI's most successful programs to date is the creation of an in-house incentive program that can pay farmers to try out either of the best management practices we identified through our research. So again, that's that delayed hay cutting or summer pasture stockpiling. And this allows producers to test out these practices and determine if they align with their production goals while not having to worry about the financial risk of trying something new. And the response to this program has been excellent. Since 2022, we have enrolled more than 46 farms across 11 counties, and we've had 2,968 acres officially enrolled in the program, with an additional 2,000 plus acres enrolled voluntarily. So it's just been a huge success. This program was originally funded by the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative and National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and will continue for the next 2 years with funding from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So actually, application periods are currently open. They're open till November 15th. So to apply or to get more information about our incentive program, you can visit vagrasslandbirds.org. And thanks to the success of this program, we've also been working more closely with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, so NRCS, their office right here in Virginia. And NRCS supports landowners by visiting properties, providing management consultations, and connecting landowners with state funding opportunities for adopting certain conservation practices. So we've been really excited to leverage our incentive program to help adapt NRCS cost share initiatives to include practices identified through our research. And as a result, state funding is now available through EQIP 511, which is the forage and harvest management program, and EQIP 528, which focuses on grazing. Again, these programs offer financial support, and I believe they're paying about $50 to $70 an acre, depending on the program. So if you have questions about this, feel free to reach out to the VGBI team or contact your local NRCS extension agent. And it's been incredibly rewarding to see the positive impacts of these best management practices. I've been surveying a lot of these farms for 5 years now, and we've actually watched bobolinks, for instance, not only thrive on the farms, but also spread onto neighboring farms. So seeing these birds flourish and expand into adjacent areas, I believe it really highlights the effectiveness of these bird-friendly practices that farmers and landowners have been implementing. Okay, well, that was a lot of information. I do want to take a moment to just point out that all of this research and everything that we do at VWL is a huge, huge, huge collaborative effort. There's a lot of logos under the funding and project partners section there. And I also want to say thank you to the landowners. For some of you that are on this call, thank you. I've learned so much from you all and have really enjoyed working with you. None of this work would be possible without you. So thank you. Thank you also to fellowship funders who've provided me an opportunity to pursue really important research while advancing my career. And a big thank you to our summer interns and students. They were, setting their alarms for 4 a.m., dealing with heat and ticks and just the highs and lows of field work, but all with a smile on their faces. So they're just have been incredible. And then lastly, I just want to give a big shout out to the VWL team, as well as my mentors. A special thank you to Dr. Amy Johnson, Dr. David Luther, as well as my collaborators, Dr. Brian Evans, Amy Scarpanetto, Dr. Jared Stavek, Dr. Joe Klosky, and Jacob Gilly. Okay, and I will leave my information up there as well for anybody who wants to get in touch. And I will hand it back over to Amy.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. That was awesome. I feel like you have accomplished so much in the few years that you've been with VWL, and I'm just really proud of how impactful this work has been. As Bernadette said to everyone on the call, this research has been so powerful that it's actually creating a movement to help farmers adopt new practices through state funding. And, this is something that can be really difficult to do in some states. And in our case, we just have this incredible research led by Bernadette. And not only that, but these partners that have helped move this work along and translate the science into really important action. And you saw the previous slide. This takes a village, this kind of work. So all of the collaborators, all of the producers and landowners that invited Bernadette onto their property and our whole team to conduct this research. Bernadette's entire fellowship at George Mason has been supported by local family foundations and individuals that believed in the work that she was doing. And so I also just want to reiterate, we're so grateful for all of the support from our donor community that has helped Bernadette get to this place. And actually, enabled this research to happen and all of the action that's come about as a result. So if you're interested in donating to Virginia Working Landscapes and more work like this, we've included a QR code here for you to take a look. There's a lot of great projects going on that we'll continue to share throughout the year. But we're just so grateful that we had Bernadette start on our team back in 2020 for a seasonal position, and all of the success that she's had since then. So congratulations, Bernadette, on all of your work. One more
Thank you
thing
so much, Amy.
I wanted to mention is, as Bernadette said, she's still in analysis, and we'll have a lot more to share in the coming months as we continue this work. And so next year, in the spring or summer, we're going to work on hosting a in-person grassland bird workshop where we'll share a lot of this information, but also invite some of our partners involved in the Grassland Bird Initiative to help talk about some of these incentive programs and actually visit some of these working farms that have adopted these important practices so you can see it in practice. So follow us on our website and social media to stay tuned for that. We have a lot of questions in the chat. So I know that we are supposed to end at 7, but I did want to leave some time for questions. So I'll hand it over to you, Brooke, to go through the chat, and Bernadette can take a crack at some of these. I don't think we'll get through them all, but we'll do our best.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and we'll know if we don't get to some of your questions. Please feel free to reach out via email. I'm happy to answer some of those.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bernadette. Yes, Bernadette, first of all, I just want to reiterate how wonderful that was and how great it was to see just all the work you've been doing. And I hope you take a second and look in this chat because you're getting a lot of praise.
Yeah.
I called you Bernadette, which I'm loving. That might have been a staff member.
Was that Dan?
So I hope you can see that and know that everyone's like really valuing research. But yes, for the sake of time, I'm gonna switch to questions and I'm gonna see how many we can get through. The first question we got was actually, do you want to continue your research into 2025, or what are your plans in 2025?
Yeah, great question. Well, a lot of the field work component for all of the research I talked about today is over. So I don't have plans to be out in the field for 2025 for the most part. But the one thing that's cool about research, right, is you start asking one question and you have a million more questions. I mean, I really hope to continue just in general, wherever my career takes me, to be a part of research. And we have such a robust data set with a lot of the work we've been doing. There's a lot more questions that we can answer, even with the data that we've already collected.
Great. Okay. Do you know what percentage of Virginia eastern meadowlarks stayed local year round?
Yeah, it was actually a pretty small percentage. I believe we just had 2 birds that stayed local out of the I can't remember how many migratory treks I had up there, but it was a smaller percentage than those that migrate.
All right. What do you think is driving the different migratory strategies among eastern meadowlarks in Virginia? Why do some migrate while others tend to stay put?
Yeah, that is a really, really great question, and one that I also want to know. Yeah, so we can kind of look to other species to come up with hypotheses of why that may be, right? In some species, we see that older or more dominant birds tend to stay put. They can kind of deal with limited resources over the winter, but that reward is that they're on their breeding grounds early, defending their territories. Whereas younger birds might be forced out, or they might be taking migratory movements to find better resources. We also see things like weather, or again, limited resources driving movements. So that's another potential factor. Unfortunately, we just don't have the data to test for some of those hypotheses. Um, we might be able to across the entire range, but that's something, yeah, I would love to know as well.
That's what you said. One question leads to another.
Yeah.
All right. And was the grass type of like warm season versus cool season grasses a factor included in conservation-friendly agriculture?
I'm guessing they're asking about like our bird-friendly beef research.
Yes, that's what this
Well,
one.
for that project alone, we're only looking at cool season non-native grasses, right? So they're all pastures and hayfields that are mostly fescue, orchard grass, other forbs like um, clover. That's sort of the dominant habitat throughout Virginia and what's primarily being grazed or hayed in our region. But again, I think looking at how nesting ecology, what that looks like in restored warm season grasses, I know is a huge interest of VWL. So maybe future research to come.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. A great
Yeah.
question. And when we hold our workshop next year, we'll be talking more about just bird populations in general, using those different field types across agricultural grasslands. So those that are planted in native warm season grasses versus cool season grasses. But a future research project that we're really interested in doing and seeking funding for is continuing this study like Bernadette's, but looking at these warm season grass fields and these fields planted with native wildflowers to assess the reproductive success of birds using those fields. Good question.
Mhm.
Awesome. And what are the main predators of these birds? Is there a minimum habitat size, acres to have success? Are bigger habitat islands the less concentrated nests to reduce predation?
Yeah, those are some really, really great questions as well. So predators in Virginia, we have feral cats, we have mesocarnivores, foxes, raccoons, possums, mice have even been shown to predate nests, as well as white-tailed deer, believe it or not. Um, and then we have a lot of avian predators. So again, our crows, ravens, grackles, blue jays. They are common predators of nests as well. Um, and the second part of that question was about patch size. So a lot of our grassland birds, well, first of all, they um, prefer contiguous open habitat, right? And there has been some research that has found that distance to a forest edge or distance to sort of a habitat edge where predators are prevalent can actually impact survival. We're not finding that in our system, but I still have to finalize my you know results for that. But if you, for example, have a field that's close to a forest edge versus one that's farther away, that one that's really open and doesn't have a lot of forest surrounding it, that's going to be sort of prime habitat for your grassland birds. So if you're, struggling to figure out where you could implement best management practices, you could prioritize those areas, really large contiguous areas. Meadowlarks need typically a minimum of 20 acres. So hopefully that answers that question.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. What do you recommend as the best stocking rate in grazed fields?
Yeah, that another really, really great question. I am in the middle of sort of figuring that out right now. So I don't have a direct answer for you at this moment, but that's something that we're including in our survival models, right? So looking at how stocking density is impacting nest survival and sort of, what is a suggested stocking rate that can, support our grassland birds. So more to come on that.
Great. Um, okay, we have a couple of students in the chat. And so one of them was asking if environmental study majors can do the kind of work that you're doing. And another one asked, I'm just going to kind of combine these two questions. Other than the collaboration between GMU and the Smithsonian, were you involved in any projects or groups on campus that contributed to your career path?
Really great question. Yeah, so I will mention George Mason. I am the vice president of the Wildlife Society Club. We host a lot of different events, so feel free to reach out to us or me to get involved. Just last week, we hosted a bird banding workshop actually at our campus at SCBI. Um, so that was great, and we plan to host more events for George Mason students. And yeah, I was also really involved in that club during undergrad, and I think that was, really shaped my career trajectory, as well as a lot of the experiences I've had outside of school. VWL, we also have an intern program. It is excellent. It is so amazing. We hire interns every year to support our research. So that is something that uh, we typically put out in December, right?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
actually
So
about to post our positions for 2025.
great.
So good timing.
Yeah. So be on the lookout for that. We usually also announce those in our newsletter, so you can subscribe to the BWL newsletter.
As a communications person, I love that kind of response. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll also share it on social media channels, so feel free to check those out. Shameless plug. Okay, let me check out these questions. We got time for just maybe a couple more. And just a reminder for everyone, we are a little bit over, but it is being recorded if you need to hop off, so you won't miss anything. Okay, this person is curious if the native grasses have any benefits to grazing animals that would make up for nutrient lost with delayed harvesting.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a lot of research coming out of Tennessee, Dr. Alan Williams looking at warm season grasses as forage. And what they're finding, right, is that our warm season grasses, well, first of all, if you just take a look at a cool season grass in the middle of July, right, a lot of our hay fields and pastures, they're brown, whereas a warm season grass is usually lush and green. And so they're actively growing during a time when our cool seasons are typically dormant. So they're finding that it is a really suitable forage that you can graze during a time, again, where those cool seasons are dormant. So yeah, they're conducting some really great research on that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do one final question before we wrap
Okay.
up. You mentioned blood testing in your presentation. Have pesticides been found to have any significant impact on population decline?
Oh, another really great question. I love all of these. Yeah. So with neonics specifically, this is a pesticide that's a really growing concern. It's been marketed as a pesticide that's supposed to be more safe, especially for our non-target species. So like our native pollinators, our bumblebees, our monarchs. Um, but there's growing evidence, right, that's showing impacts to our pollinators as well as our grassland birds and other species as well. And these pesticides are known as hormone disruptors. So they're impacting birds in kind of less obvious ways, but they're impacting their behavior, their ability to breed. And there was a paper that came out, I think it was in Nature in 2020, that actually showed that grassland birds specifically, as well as our insectivorous birds. So think about our tree swallows, our eastern bluebirds, that those two guilds of birds are suffering from population declines that are attributed to neonics on the landscape.
Hmm. Well, excellent. Thank you for all sharing so much of your knowledge and just all the work you do. For me personally, it's just a joy to see your work and see your excitement about the work and be able to be with you in the field. And I'm so thrilled that you got to share that with our broader community. And Amy, I
Thank you,
don't know if you
Brooke,
have
and
any
thank you,
final.
Yeah.
Bernadette. I just want to thank everyone so much for coming out tonight. And thank you for all of your questions. That was awesome. There was just a lot of great conversation going on in the chat. So, again, this is being recorded and we'll be posting it to our website later this week. But thank you so much for tuning in and for supporting our work. And we look forward to more emerging scientists webinars in the future.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.